Again, talking about another one of my favorite subjects in this class, service recovery. I love talking about service recovery. So the importance of customer satisfaction is what we're talking about here, and consumer complaint behavior, CCB, why people do or do not complain. We'll look at service recovery systems, guarantees, and strategies will be how we finish that off in the last lecture in the class environment itself. So the importance of customer satisfaction, I think we can see by this that the average business does not hear from 96% of their unhappy customers. So this is a challenge, right? We have people who are unhappy and they don't tell us about it. For every complaint we receive, there's probably 26 people that had the same problem. That's scary, isn't it? 26 people had the same problem and we don't know about it. The average person with a problem tells 9 to 10 people, 13% tell more than 20. That's probably multiplied a great deal in today's environment with reviews. And I can tell you that I give to my complaints to hundreds of students over the years. So it definitely, I'm way on the high end of that nature of when I do complain or when I have a good quality service as well. Customers who have complaints resolved tell an average of 5 people. So if you resolve something quickly, people talk positively about you. Complainers are more likely to do business with you again than non-complainers if you solve the problem, 50 to 70%, right? 95% if you solve it quickly. So if you solve a problem quickly, people come back. If you look at the complainers as an iceberg, you see 1 to 5% complain to management in the company here at the top. Only 1 to 5%. 45% complain to frontline, and 50% don't complain at all. Right? These are some other statistics here in terms of customer aspect of things. Just take a look at these. 50% of employees said their company provides service via mobile devices today. In terms of the 62% of organizations view customer experience provided through contact centers as a competitive differentiator. In other words, how they actually get across that they're better than those others. By 2020, it says that's this year, right? Which probably isn't true because this year is so different than any other. But customer experience will take over the price and product in terms of key brand differentiator. But I think your generation is definitely moving in that direction. Now, here's an interesting chart in terms of what we look at in terms of unhappy customers. So if you have an unhappy customer and they don't complain, their chances of coming back 9%. If you have an unhappy customer who complains and is not resolved, maybe a little less than 20% don't come back, or come back rather, 20% come back. If the complaint is resolved, 54%, and these say if complaints resolved quickly, 82%. So different studies show different things, but basically I think you can agree that if you complain and get it resolved quickly, you're more likely to get the person back, and if you don't hear from the unhappy customer, they're just not going to come back and you never knew it. So the benefits of this are that you get positive customer satisfaction, as you have positive word of mouth, they buy more frequently, they come back more often, right? They're less likely to be lost to competitors because they will accept the fact that maybe everything isn't perfect every time and still come back and know that you can resolve it. Their price competition is no longer a factor. I'll pay for something if I know that I'm going to get quality service. I trust that you feel that way as well. Positive work environments, right? People like to come and they like to work there because they deliver a good positive service. So we're going to talk about the concept of customer complaint behavior, something I did some research on back when I was a graduate student, actually, years ago. What we're talking about here is in the zone of tolerance that we talked about earlier. Remember, you have a desired service and an adequate service. Okay, when we're talking about the failure aspect here, we're talking about something that fell out of that zone. In other words, below adequate service. Customer complaint is something below adequate service. Our expectations, we have 2 types. We talked a little bit about these before, but we have normative expectations. What should happen, right? General expectations due to past experience, word of mouth, external communications. Okay, that's what we expect should happen. And then you have the predictive expectations, what will happen based on past experience. So that's predominantly going to be past experience in terms of what will happen, and normative is we haven't necessarily experienced it before, or we have past experience with similar types of things, but maybe not that. So we stayed at a hotel of the same brand before, for example. We ate at a different restaurant that's a part of the same chain. Now this is a little complicated, so I'm going to read these off word for word. Okay, the lower the normative expectation, what should happen, the higher the perception of what did happen. So if we have a low expectation going in, people's perceptions could be considerably higher than what that expectation was, and that's a good thing for us, right? The higher the predictive expectation, in other words, I've been there before, the higher the perception of what did happen. So if I expected the same great service the next time around and I got it again, the higher my perception will be. The higher the perception of the service quality, the greater the intention to return and recommend. So if our perception is higher, we're more likely to return, right? So if we give these responses in terms of what happens when we have a service failure. So this is a service failure now. Right? We're not talking about the satisfaction side. We're talking about the dissatisfaction side. The first thing over here on the right-hand side, if you look at, is do nothing. We just switch providers, or we come back again, but we saw before only less than 10% actually come back again. So that's a challenge for us. We missed those altogether. If they take action, they could complain to the provider. They could complain to family and friends, or they could complain to a third party. Which do you want? Do you want them to complain to their family and friends and not tell you? Do you want them to complain to a third party like a peer-to-peer review site and not to you? I don't think so, right? You want them to complain to you. You don't mind if they complain in other places, but you want to make sure that they also complain to you. Okay, that's an important element. They complain to you. So then what happens is they either switch or they stay. Switch or they stay. So if service problem reactions, complain and it gets resolved. Complain and it isn't resolved, dissatisfied, and don't complain. This is a video again. I'll give you the link to this video in terms of the types of complainers. I did in the research that I did, just to give you a little background behind this. I was looking at restaurants. It was a big survey of a lot of different people, and I had one or two questions in there in terms of what people did. And one of the things we looked at was who would complain to management in a restaurant if something went wrong. And we found, interestingly enough, that when we looked at different types of complainers, that if we looked at seniors, for example, you would think, well, maybe they would be the ones to complain. No, actually they weren't. They were the most unlikely to complain. What was the challenge, or excuse me, they complain and not come back. They would come back. The challenge was the young family person who would have a complaint and then just wouldn't talk about it and come back. Maybe they didn't want to embarrass themselves in front of their kids or whatever it may be. So we talked about actions that could be done to be able to alleviate that. So something you might think about. What would you do to alleviate that issue if you were in a restaurant and you had a young family there, and you know that they're not likely to complain if something went wrong because they don't want to do that in front of their kids? How would you get them to tell you if there's something that went wrong? So we look at these particular complainers. You have the passives. They're least likely to take action, right? So they spread negative word of mouth, but they don't tell you. The voicers, excuse me, they don't spread word of mouth. They just simply don't come back, right? The voicers, those people complain to the provider, but they're not likely to spread negative word of mouth because they've complained to you. They've told you what they are. So they could be our best friends, those voicers. The irates, they engage in negative word of mouth to the friends and other people, tell everybody else about it. They're angry, and the provider is only a second chance that they're actually going to hear them or hear from them. And the activists, those are the ones that average propensity to complain on all levels, and they're always complaining about everything in the process, and we see those sometimes in the reviews. So causes of poor service, right? Short-term focus on costs versus benefits. Cynical about customer motives. You think, well, what the heck? I don't think they're really going to be that. I don't take them that serious in terms of what they actually say. What do they know, right? We know better. Dissatisfied, don't complain to the company, only to another individual. That's a big challenge for us. That's one of the big challenges for our poor service. So if we look at these causes behind the service switching, you look at the pricing issues over here on the left side. If you'll move myself out of the way here. So you have the pricing issues at the top, inconvenience, core service failure, service encounter failures, uncaring, unpolite, service mistakes, and so on. Those are on that side. And now then the switching behavior is, what is their response to it? The response to service failure is negative response, no response, or reluctant to respond. They go to the competition. They see some ethical issues over here. They just simply involuntarily switch. Customer moved, provider closed, whatever it may be. So there's a relationship here between what happens and what their response is. So it causes a poor service. I looked at that. Sorry about that. We went backwards. All right. So treat customers fairly. You can have outcome fairness, right? So if you're treated well, that should match the level of dissatisfaction, then you feel things are fair, right? Outcome is fair. You got compensated effectively, things are fair. Procedural fairness. Fairness in terms of the policies, rules, and timeliness. In other words, maybe you don't need to be compensated, but you just need to know why it happened the way it did. And then interactional fairness, which is the politeness and care and honesty of how the person reacts. So when we're thinking about our service from a person standpoint, interactional is important. From a procedural standpoint, that's our policies and so on. And the outcome is, how do we compensate? We'll be talking about Ritz-Carlton's aspect in terms of what they do to service recovery, in terms of their aspect of how they go about doing that in order to make sure that people feel it is a fair outcome and they leave it in the hands of the employee. So we look at this chart here and you look at the outcome versus the procedural versus the interactional and the overall aspect. And what you see here is the ones that feel that it's fair, the outcome fairness versus the ones that feel that it's unfair, and likely down the path in terms of what's fair and satisfactory. So in the unfair aspect of it, the outcome fairness, unfair is a higher percentage, potential higher percentage of people from that standpoint than you do from the others. And these are your discussion questions. Thanks very much.